Three orphaned children on the dusty roads of Arizona Territory had no idea that helping a stranded wealthy rancher fix his broken wagon wheel would change their lives forever. When Samuel Crawford's wagon broke down miles from town with a crucial business meeting waiting, these forgotten kids didn't hesitate to lend a hand. They refused his money, asked for nothing in return, and disappeared back into their hard life at the orphanage. But what happened next will restore your faith in humanity. Just one day later, a covered wagon rolled up to St. Mary's Home for Children, and what the driver told Sister Margaret left everyone in tears. This is a true story from the Old West that proves sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for more incredible stories from the frontier. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our Western family. The autumn winds of 1885 swept across the Arizona Territory with an unforgiving bite, carrying the promise of an early winter storm. Samuel Crawford, owner of the sprawling Double Eagle Ranch, gripped the reins of his finest stallion as he guided his loaded wagon down the winding trail toward Silver Ridge. At 52, Sam was a man accustomed to control. His ranch was the most prosperous in 3 counties. His horses were sought after from California to Texas, and his word carried weight in every business deal from here to Phoenix. The wagon creaked under the weight of his finest leather goods and silver-adorned saddles, samples meant to seal the biggest cattle contract of his career. This wasn't just any meeting. It was with the territorial government, a deal that would supply horses to cavalry units across the Southwest. The kind of contract that could set a man up for life, even a man who was already wealthy beyond most people's dreams. Sam had built his empire from nothing, starting with a single horse and a determination forged in the harsh realities of frontier life. After losing his beloved wife Eleanor to fever 3 years prior, work had become his sole companion, his ranch the only thing that filled the hollow ache in his chest. He threw himself into breeding the finest horses, expanding his land and accumulating wealth with a single-minded focus that impressed business partners and worried the few friends he had left. The meeting in Silver Ridge was scheduled for 2 o'clock sharp, and punctuality was everything in business. Sam prided himself on never being late, never making excuses, and never letting anyone down who depended on him. His reputation as a reliable man was worth more than all the silver in his strongbox. But as the morning wore on, the sky began to darken with ominous clouds. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds dancing across the trail and stirring up dust devils in the distance. Sam urged his horse forward, calculating the time in his head. If he maintained this pace, he'd arrive in Silver Ridge with 20 minutes to spare, enough time to clean up and present himself properly to the government officials. That's when disaster struck. Crack! The sharp sound of splintering wood echoed across the desert as Sam's wagon lurched violently to one side. The left rear wheel, weakened by months of rough terrain and heavy loads, finally gave way. The wooden spokes shattered like kindling, sending the wagon tilting at a dangerous angle. Sam pulled hard on the reins, bringing his startled horse to a stop as the wagon settled with a grinding thud onto its damaged axle. "Damn it all to hell," Sam cursed, his voice carrying across the empty landscape. He jumped down from the driver's seat, his polished boots hitting the dusty ground with a thump. The broken wheel lay in pieces around the wagon, some spokes buried in the dirt, others scattered like broken bones across the trail. Sam circled the wagon, assessing the damage with growing desperation. This wasn't something that could be fixed with rope and willpower. The wheel was completely destroyed. He'd need a replacement wheel, proper tools, and at least 2 strong men to lift the wagon. Out here, 15 miles from the nearest settlement, he might as well have been stranded on the moon. He pulled his pocket watch from his vest with trembling fingers. 11:30. 2.5 hours until the most important meeting of his life, and he was stuck in the middle of nowhere with a broken-down wagon and no way to signal for help. The government officials wouldn't wait. They had other ranchers eager for the contract, men who would show up on time with their horses and their promises. The wind howled around him, stirring up the dust and carrying the scent of approaching rain. In the distance he could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, dark and threatening. If the rains came, the trails would turn to mud, making travel impossible for days. Sam Crawford, the man who controlled thousands of acres and hundreds of horses, who employed dozens of men and commanded respect across the territory, stood helpless beside his broken wagon. For the first time in years, all his wealth and influence meant nothing. He was just a man, alone on a desolate trail, watching his carefully laid plans crumble like the shattered spokes at his feet. Sam stared at the wreckage of his wagon wheel, his mind racing through increasingly desperate options. He could unhitch his horse and ride bareback to Silver Ridge, but that would mean abandoning thousands of dollars worth of merchandise to any passing bandits or scavengers. The samples he carried weren't just valuable. They were specifically crafted to showcase his ranch's quality, each piece a testament to the superior horses he bred. Without them, his presentation would be worthless, just empty words from another rancher making promises he couldn't prove. The pocket watch felt heavy in his hand as he checked it again. 11:45. Every minute that ticked by was another nail in the coffin of his dreams. The government contract would go to someone else. Probably Thomas Whitmore from the Lazy W Ranch, his biggest competitor, who'd been circling this deal like a vulture for months. Whitmore would love nothing more than to see Samuel Crawford fail, especially after Sam had outbid him on prime grazing land last spring. Sam walked around his horse, patting the stallion's neck as he considered his options. "What do you think, Thunder? Should we make a run for it?" The horse snorted and pawed the ground, as if sensing his master's distress. But even Thunder, fast as he was, couldn't carry both Sam and the heavy samples the 15 miles to Silver Ridge in time for the meeting. The wind picked up again, colder now, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of rain. Sam looked up at the darkening sky with growing dread. Those weren't just storm clouds gathering. They were the kind of black, roiling masses that brought flash floods and turned dry creek beds into raging torrents. If the rain started before he could get moving, he'd be trapped out here until morning, maybe longer. He began pulling tools from the wagon bed, hoping against hope that he might somehow jury-rig a temporary wheel. But as he sorted through his meager collection of rope, a small hatchet, and basic supplies, the futility of the situation became clear. He was a rancher, not a wheelwright. Even if he had the skills, there wasn't enough wood on his entire wagon to craft a new wheel, and certainly nothing that could support the weight of his loaded cargo. "Think, Crawford, think," he muttered to himself, pacing back and forth beside the crippled wagon. In all his years of business, he'd never failed to meet an obligation. His word was his bond, and his reputation for reliability had opened more doors than his money ever could. Men trusted him because he delivered on his promises, rain or shine, hell or high water. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, one of the wealthiest men in the territory, and he was as helpless as a greenhorn, fresh off the wagon train from back east. All his success, all his careful planning, all his meticulous preparation, and he was going to be undone by a piece of wood and some metal spokes. Sam thought about Eleanor, about what she would have said in a moment like this. She'd always been the practical one, the voice of reason when his pride threatened to get in the way of good sense. "Sometimes, Samuel," she used to say, "the Lord humbles us just when we think we've got it all figured out." She'd probably tell him that losing one contract wasn't the end of the world, that there would be other opportunities. But this wasn't just about the money, though losing this contract would hurt financially. This was about proving that the Double Eagle Ranch was the premier horse operation in the Southwest. This was about building a legacy that would outlast him, something that would make Eleanor proud if she could see him from wherever she'd gone. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, striking the dusty ground with audible impacts. Sam looked up at the sky, feeling the moisture on his weathered face, and for a moment he almost gave in to despair. The storm was coming whether he was ready or not, and there was nothing his money, his influence, or his determination could do to stop it. Time was running out, and Samuel Crawford, master of his domain, controller of his destiny, had never felt more powerless in his entire life. The first drops of rain were turning into a steady drizzle when Sam heard something unexpected cutting through the whistle of the wind. Voices, young voices, carried on the breeze from somewhere down the trail behind him. He turned, squinting through the gathering gloom, and saw 3 small figures making their way along the dusty path. As they drew closer, Sam could make out their details. 3 children, none of them looking older than 14, walking with the kind of purpose that spoke of familiarity with these lonely trails. They wore simple, patched clothing, the kind of hand-me-downs that spoke of hard times and careful mending. The oldest, a boy with sandy hair sticking out from under a worn felt hat, carried a canvas sack slung over his shoulder. Beside him walked a girl with braided auburn hair, her dress clean but faded from many washings. The youngest, a freckled boy who couldn't have been more than 10, skipped along beside them, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. Sam's first instinct was suspicion. Out here in the territory, you learned to be wary of strangers, especially when you were carrying valuables. But as the children drew closer, he could see they were just that, children. Their faces were open and curious, not calculating or threatening. Still, what were kids doing out here alone, miles from any settlement? The oldest boy noticed the broken wagon first, pointing it out to his companions. They stopped about 20 feet away, the 3 of them huddled together as they took in the scene. The well-dressed man, the expensive wagon tilted at an odd angle, and the scattered remains of the wheel. "Mister," the sandy-haired boy called out, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "Looks like you're having some trouble there." Sam straightened up, brushing the rain from his vest. Up close, he could see that despite their worn clothing, the children were clean and well cared for. The girl had intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, while the youngest boy's face was bright with curiosity. "That's putting it mildly, son," Sam replied, his voice gruff with frustration. "Wheel gave out on me, and I've got somewhere important to be." The girl stepped forward slightly, studying the broken wheel with the kind of practical assessment that surprised Sam. "That's a bad break," she said, her voice soft but confident. "Spokes are all shattered. You'd need a whole new wheel to fix that proper." Sam nodded grimly. "That's what I figured. You children shouldn't be out here with a storm coming. Where are your folks?" The 3 exchanged a glance that Sam couldn't quite read. There was something there, not shame exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance that spoke of hard lessons learned young. "We're from St. Mary's in Silver Ridge," the oldest boy said simply. "Been in town doing some work for Dr. Henderson, helping him move supplies. I'm Jake, this here's Molly, and the little one's Tommy. Orphans." Sam felt an unexpected pang of something, not quite pity, but recognition. He'd been alone in the world once, too, though not quite so young. These children were making their way in a hard world with nothing but their wits, and whatever kindness strangers might show them. "Well, Jake, I'm Sam Crawford," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I appreciate you stopping, but there's not much anyone can do about this wheel. You'd best get on to Silver Ridge before this storm really hits." Tommy, the youngest, had been studying the wagon with the intense focus that only children could muster. Suddenly he piped up, "Mr. Crawford, we helped fix a wheel for old Pete's cart last month when it broke down near the church. Molly's real good with tools." Molly shot the boy a warning look, but Jake was already nodding thoughtfully. "Tommy's right. We've done our share of fixing things around St. Mary's. Sister Margaret says we're pretty handy when we put our minds to it." Sam looked at the three of them. These small, unlikely saviors who'd appeared out of nowhere on this desolate trail. Common sense told him that children couldn't solve a problem that had him stumped, but something in their earnest faces made him hesitate before dismissing their offer outright. Jake set down his canvas sack and walked around the broken wagon, his young eyes studying the damage with surprising expertise. "We'll need to find something to use as a lever to lift the wagon," he said, his voice taking on the confident tone of someone who'd solved problems before. "And we'll need wood for a makeshift wheel." Sam watched in amazement as the three children immediately went to work with the efficiency of a seasoned crew. Molly knelt beside the shattered wheel, sorting through the broken spokes and examining the metal rim that had somehow remained intact. Her small fingers traced the curved iron, checking for cracks or weaknesses. "The rim's still good," she announced. "If we can find enough straight wood and something to bind it with, we might be able to make something that'll hold long enough to get you to town." Tommy had wandered off the trail and was already dragging dead branches back toward the wagon. "There's lots of good wood over by those rocks," he called out, his young voice bright with excitement at the adventure. "Some of these pieces are real straight." Sam stood there for a moment, stunned by their immediate willingness to help. "Now wait just a minute," he began. "I can't ask you children to—" "You didn't ask," Jake interrupted with a grin. "We offered. Besides, Sister Margaret always says, the good Lord puts us where we're needed, and seems like you need us right about now." The rain was falling steadier now, but the children paid it no mind. Molly had pulled a small but well-maintained knife from her pocket and was already stripping bark from the branches Tommy had collected, testing each piece for strength and straightness. Jake had found a sturdy piece of deadwood that could serve as a lever. "Mr. Crawford," Jake said, positioning the makeshift lever under the wagon's axle, "we're gonna need you to help us lift. On the count of 3, you push down hard on this end, while Tommy and I get the wheel in position." Sam found himself following the boy's instructions, marveling at how naturally Jake had taken command of the situation. As they worked, the children chattered easily among themselves, their teamwork speaking of countless hours spent solving problems together. Molly worked with remarkable skill, using strips of leather from Jake's sack to bind the wooden spokes to the metal rim. Her fingers moved quickly and surely, creating tight knots that would hold under pressure. "This won't be pretty," she said, wiping rain from her face, "but it'll get you where you're going." "Where'd you learn to do that?" Sam asked, genuinely impressed by her craftsmanship. "Sister Margaret says idle hands are the devil's workshop," Molly replied with a small smile. "She's got us learning all kinds of useful things. Jake's best with animals, I'm good with fixing things, and Tommy here can climb anything." Tommy beamed at the praise, then scurried up onto the wagon to help guide the makeshift wheel into position. Despite his small size, he moved with confidence and agility, positioning himself to help steady the wheel as the adults lifted. The improvised wheel was crude but functional, wooden spokes lashed to the metal rim with leather strips, the whole assembly reinforced with additional binding around the hub. It wouldn't win any prizes for craftsmanship, but it looked like it might actually hold together. "All right, let's see if this works," Jake said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. The 3 children had worked for nearly an hour in the rain, their clothes now thoroughly soaked, their hands muddy from handling the wood and leather. Sam tested the wheel gingerly, applying his weight gradually. To his amazement, it held firm. The leather bindings creaked slightly under the load, but the structure remained solid. "I'll be damned," he breathed, then caught himself. "Begging your pardon for the language." Tommy giggled. "We've heard worse from old Pete when his mule gets stubborn." As Sam hitched Thunder back to the wagon, he felt a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. These 3 orphan children had accomplished in an hour what he'd been certain was impossible. They'd worked without complaint in the rain, using nothing but scraps and ingenuity to solve his problem. The makeshift wheel turned smoothly as he gave it a test rotation. It would hold, he was certain of it. Sam straightened up from testing the wheel, rain dripping from the brim of his hat as he looked at the 3 children who had just performed what felt like a miracle. Their clothes were soaked through, their hands dirty from working with the rough wood and leather, yet all 3 wore expressions of quiet satisfaction at a job well done. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. These weren't just any children who had helped him. They were orphans, kids who probably had never seen more than a few cents at a time. The least he could do was make sure their kindness was properly rewarded. "Now then," Sam said, his voice warm with gratitude, "I can't let you young folks go unrewarded for this." He pulled out several crisp bills, more money than most adults in Silver Ridge saw in a month. "This should be enough to buy you some proper clothes and maybe a good meal or 2. Jake took a step back, his eyes wide, as he saw the amount of money Sam was offering. "Mr. Crawford, that's an awful lot of money." "It's what you've earned," Sam insisted, holding the bills out toward them. "You saved my business deal, maybe my whole reputation. This is the least I can do." But to his amazement, Jake shook his head firmly. "We can't take that, sir. We didn't help you for money." Molly nodded in agreement, wringing rainwater from her braid. "Sister Margaret always says that when you help someone, you do it because it's right, not because of what you might get back." Sam stared at them in disbelief. In his world, everything had a price. Every favor came with expectations. Every act of kindness had strings attached. Men helped him because they wanted something in return: contracts, influence, connections. Yet here were 3 children who had worked for over an hour in the rain, solved an impossible problem, and were refusing payment. "But surely you need—" Sam began, then stopped himself. He was about to say they needed the money, but something in their dignified refusal made him reconsider his words. Surely St. Mary's could use the donation? Tommy spoke up for the first time since they'd finished the repair. "Sister Margaret says we got everything we need: food, beds, and each other. She says being greedy for more is what makes folks unhappy." Sam felt something strange stirring in his chest, a mixture of humility and something else he couldn't quite name. When was the last time someone had done something for him without wanting anything in return? When Eleanor was alive, perhaps, but she'd been his wife. These were strangers who owed him nothing. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "You're orphans. You must need things, clothes, books, maybe something special you've been wanting." Jake smiled, and for a moment he looked older than his years. "Mr. Crawford, we got what we need, and helping you, well, that felt good. Made us feel useful, you know, like we matter." "You do matter," Sam said, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "What you've done here, I've never had anyone refuse payment for good work before." Molly stepped forward slightly, her brown eyes serious. "Maybe that's because most folks are doing work, not helping." "There's a difference." The rain was coming down harder now, and Sam knew he needed to get moving if he was going to make his meeting. But he found himself reluctant to leave these remarkable children. They'd given him something more valuable than a repaired wheel. They'd reminded him that goodness still existed in the world, without strings attached. "At least let me give you a ride to Silver Ridge," he offered. "It's pouring rain, and you'll catch your death walking in this weather." The 3 children exchanged glances, and Jake nodded gratefully. "That'd be mighty kind of you, Mr. Crawford. We'd appreciate that." As they climbed into the wagon, Sam couldn't help but marvel at what had just happened. He was used to being in control, used to paying for what he needed and getting what he paid for. But these children had turned that world upside down, showing him a kind of generosity he'd forgotten existed. The makeshift wheel held steady as they began moving down the muddy trail toward Silver Ridge. But Sam's thoughts weren't on the upcoming meeting anymore. They were on 3 orphaned children who had just taught a wealthy rancher something invaluable about the true meaning of kindness. The wagon rolled steadily through the rain toward Silver Ridge, the makeshift wheel holding true, despite the muddy conditions. Sam found himself stealing glances at his three passengers, who sat quietly in the wagon bed, seemingly content despite their soaked clothing. They didn't complain about the cold or the discomfort. They simply watched the landscape pass by, with the kind of patient acceptance that spoke of lives lived without luxury. "So you children do odd jobs around town?" Sam asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "Doc Henderson pays us to help move supplies and clean his office. Mrs. Patterson at the general store sometimes needs help stocking shelves. Nothing too fancy, but it keeps us busy and helps St. Mary's with expenses." Sam nodded, doing quick calculations in his head. The kind of work these children described would earn them pennies, yet they just refused more money than they probably saw in a year. It didn't make sense, not in his world, where every decision was measured against profit and loss. As they approached the outskirts of Silver Ridge, Sam could see the modest buildings of the town coming into view. The church steeple rose above the other structures, and beside it stood a simple two-story building that must be St. Mary's Home for Children. It looked well-maintained but humble, the kind of place that survived on donations and goodwill rather than wealth. "That's our home," Tommy said proudly, pointing to the orphanage. "Sister Margaret's probably wondering where we got to." Sam pulled the wagon to a stop in front of St. Mary's, and the children climbed down with quick thanks. He watched as they hurried through the rain toward the front door, Jake carrying their canvas sack, Molly helping Tommy navigate a puddle. Just before they reached the entrance, Jake turned back. "Good luck with your meeting, Mr. Crawford," the boy called out. "Hope everything works out for you." Then they disappeared inside, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts and the steady rhythm of rain on the wagon roof. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the simple building where these remarkable children lived. Through one of the windows, he could see warm lamplight and the silhouettes of people moving about. Probably Sister Margaret welcoming the children home, making sure they got into dry clothes. Sam clicked the reins and guided Thunder toward the business district, his mind churning with unfamiliar thoughts. The meeting with the government officials was in 20 minutes, and he should be focused on his presentation, on closing the deal that would secure his ranch's future. Instead, he found himself thinking about 3 orphan children who had everything to gain and nothing to lose, yet had asked for nothing. The government office was a substantial brick building in the center of town. Sam pulled up in front, noting with satisfaction that despite everything, he was going to be on time. The makeshift wheel had held perfectly, better than perfectly actually. It had gotten him here safely and on schedule, which was more than his expensive, custom-made wheel had managed to do. Inside the office, Sam went through the motions of his presentation. He displayed his leather goods, talked about his breeding programs, outlined his capacity to meet the cavalry's needs. The officials were impressed, asked the right questions, and by the end of the hour he had secured the contract he'd worked months to arrange. But as he shook hands with the government representatives and accepted their congratulations, Sam felt strangely empty. This should have been the pinnacle of his professional life, the deal that would cement his reputation and secure his financial future. Yet all he could think about were 3 children who had worked in the rain without expecting anything in return. Walking back to his wagon, Sam paused in front of St. Mary's again. The building looked peaceful in the late afternoon light, smoke rising from its chimney, warm light glowing in the windows. Somewhere inside, Jake, Molly, and Tommy were probably helping with dinner or doing their lessons, living their simple lives with a richness of spirit that Sam's wealth couldn't buy. For the first time in 3 years, since Eleanor's death, Sam Crawford felt a stirring of something beyond ambition and accumulation. Those children had reminded him that there was more to life than contracts and profits, more to being human than what you could afford to buy. The contract signing had been completed by late afternoon, but Sam found himself unable to leave Silver Ridge. Instead of heading back to his ranch as planned, he took a room at the hotel and spent the evening walking the quiet streets, his mind wrestling with thoughts that wouldn't let him rest. Every time he tried to focus on his business success, he saw 3 children working in the rain, refusing payment for their kindness. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm having passed through the night. Sam rose early and made his way to the hotel dining room, where he struck up conversations with the locals over breakfast. What he learned about St. Mary's Home for Children only deepened the strange restlessness he'd been feeling since yesterday. "Sister Margaret does her best," explained Mrs. Patterson from the general store, "but it's hard keeping that place running on donations alone. Those children work harder than most adults I know, and they never complain about having so little." Dr. Henderson, who had employed the children the day before, nodded gravely. "Fine youngsters, all of them. Jake's got a natural way with animals. Molly can fix anything you put in front of her, and Tommy, well, that boy could charm the scales off a snake, but they deserve more than just getting by." After breakfast, Sam walked slowly toward St. Mary's, his decision crystallizing with each step. The building looked different in the morning light. Not just humble, but in need. Paint was peeling from the shutters. Some of the roof shingles were missing, and the front steps sagged slightly under years of use. Sister Margaret answered his knock, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She looked at Sam with polite curiosity, taking in his expensive clothes and the nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him. "Sister Margaret, I'm Samuel Crawford. I believe 3 of your children helped me yesterday when my wagon broke down." Her face lit up with understanding. "Ah, you're the gentleman they told me about. Jake, Molly, and Tommy came home so excited about helping you fix your wheel. Please come in." The inside of St. Mary's was clean and well organized, but Sam's experienced eye could see the signs of making do with very little. Furniture was mismatched but carefully maintained. Children's artwork covered walls that needed fresh paint, and he could hear the shuffle of many small feet in rooms that probably housed more children than they were designed for. "Sister, I need to ask you something important," Sam said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Those 3 children, Jake, Molly, and Tommy, what are their prospects? For adoption, I mean." Sister Margaret's expression grew thoughtful and slightly sad. "They're wonderful children, Mr. Crawford, but finding families for older children is challenging. Most folks who come looking want babies or toddlers. Jake's 14, which makes him practically a man in most people's eyes. And the 3 of them are so close, almost like siblings. It would break their hearts to be separated." Sam nodded slowly, pieces of a plan forming in his mind. What if someone wanted to adopt all 3? What would that require? The nun studied him carefully. "Mr. Crawford, adoption is a serious commitment. These aren't just any children. They're remarkable, but they've also been through hardship. They'd need a stable home, someone who understands that love isn't something you can buy." "I understand that," Sam said quietly. "My wife Eleanor and we always wanted children, but—" He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "Yesterday, those children gave me something I didn't know I was missing. They reminded me what it means to help someone just because it's the right thing to do." Sister Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "They're at school right now, but they'll be back this afternoon. Would you like to speak with them? This decision needs to come from their hearts as much as yours." Sam nodded, feeling a nervous excitement he hadn't experienced since courting Eleanor decades ago. "Yes, I'd like that very much. But sister, there's something else. This place needs work, repairs, improvements. If you'd allow me, I'd like to help with that too." The nun's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Crawford, what exactly are you proposing?" Sam smiled, feeling more certain than he had about anything in years. "I'm proposing to give those children a home, and to make sure this place can keep helping others like them for years to come. That afternoon, Sam waited nervously in Sister Margaret's small office, as the sound of children's voices filled the hallway. School had just ended, and St. Mary's was alive with the energy of young people returning home. When Jake, Molly, and Tommy appeared in the doorway, their faces lit up with surprised recognition. "Mr. Crawford," Tommy exclaimed, rushing forward, "did your meeting go well? Did the wheel hold up?" "It did indeed," Sam said, standing up with a smile. "Better than I could have hoped. In fact, that's part of why I'm here." Sister Margaret gestured for the children to sit down, her expression gentle but serious. "Mr. Crawford has something important to discuss with you three." Sam looked at each of their faces, Jake's cautious maturity, Molly's intelligent curiosity, Tommy's open enthusiasm, and felt his heart swell with an emotion he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's death. "Yesterday you three did more than fix my wagon wheel. You reminded me what it means to be part of a family, to help each other without expecting anything in return." The children exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the moment, but not yet understanding where it was leading. "I've been alone for 3 years now," Sam continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "My ranch is successful, but it's been empty without people to share it with. I've been thinking that maybe you three might consider giving an old rancher a chance to be your family." The room fell completely silent. Jake's eyes widened, Molly's hand flew to her mouth, and Tommy looked back and forth between his friends and Sam, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. "You mean—" Jake started, his voice barely above a whisper. "You want to adopt us? All of us?" "If you'll have me," Sam said simply. "I know I'm not young, and I know I've got a lot to learn about being a father. But I promise you this, you'll never want for anything, and you'll always have a home at the Double Eagle Ranch." Tommy was the first to move, launching himself from his chair into Sam's arms with a joyful whoop. "Really? We can stay together? We can have a real family?" Molly was crying now, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. "Mr. Crawford, are you sure? We're just orphans from St. Mary's." Sam knelt down to her level, his own eyes misting. "Molly, you're not just anything. You're 3 of the finest people I've ever met, and I'd be honored to call you my children." Jake, always the protective older brother, stepped forward with characteristic seriousness. "What about our chores here? Sister Margaret needs us." Sister Margaret laughed through her own tears. "Jake, my dear boy, Mr. Crawford has also generously offered to help renovate St. Mary's. We'll have plenty of help, and you 3 deserve a real home." Over the following weeks, the transformation began. Sam moved the children to the Double Eagle Ranch, where they marveled at having their own rooms, regular meals, and all the space 3 energetic young people could want. Jake discovered he had a natural gift for training horses. Molly became indispensable in the ranch workshop, and Tommy appointed himself chief morale officer, bringing laughter to every corner of the property. True to his word, Sam also funded extensive improvements to St. Mary's. The building got a new roof, fresh paint, modern plumbing, and expanded facilities. More importantly, his donation established an endowment that would keep the orphanage running for generations to come. 6 months later, as Sam sat on his porch watching his 3 adopted children race their horses across the pasture, he marveled at how completely his life had changed. The government contract had been successful, but it paled in comparison to the joy of having a family again. Jake called out something to Molly, who laughed and spurred her horse faster, while Tommy whooped with delight as he tried to keep up. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Jake raised his glass of milk in a toast. "To second chances," he said solemnly, "and to finding out that family isn't about blood. It's about choosing to love each other." Sam raised his own glass, his heart full to bursting. "To the best broken wagon wheel that ever happened to me," he replied. "And to 3 children who taught an old man that the greatest wealth isn't what you own, it's who you get to come home to." Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting a golden glow over the Double Eagle Ranch, where four souls had found exactly what they'd been searching for all along.